aim for the heart, as I go directly to the core of the issue, as I will be looking into debt and money, or debt money, how I like to call them, because that is what they really are. Back in the old days, when there was a gold standard, the money supply in the economy was tightly chained to the quantity of gold that the central bank held in reserve. That was great, and not because gold has any real or intrinsic value, except for jewelry or some minor electronic use. The real magic of gold was that it was limited, and that prevented our governments from manipulating and controlling the production of money. The only way you could increase the quantity of gold and implicitly the quantity of money in the economy was either by mining or by engaging in war against other countries and literally confiscating their gold. After the gold standard was removed after some series of machinations from 1933 to 1971, the only thing that the money supply is tied to is government debt. And that is how we arrive at the notion of debt money. And there is even more. Our governments created the concept of monetizing the debt, by which they can buy back distressed or bad loans from the banking system, issuing in return credit facilities or injections of capital. It's like they manufactured their own checking account, their own blank check, by which they can print money out of thin air. And by Almighty God they started printing. Let's have a look. My name is Radu Mărincean and I welcome you to Antiviral Socionomics. The idea to talk about that came to me by studying the wonderful charts offered by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, or FRED, which I think is the only central bank around the world that gives you unlimited and free access to such sensitive data. The best way I can describe our behavior and our government's behavior around that is by comparing it to drug addiction. We are really high on that, and this chronically high level of exposure has damaged our reward system. We need increasingly higher and higher doses of it, even if the real effects on the economy are more and more subdued. And if you don't believe me, just look at the real gross domestic product or GDP growth. In the end, the only outcome of this policy should be overdose. If we look at the USA federal debt, they have reached $26.8 trillion or 2.84 times the level from 2008, when they really needed to print money in order to save the world economy from collapsing. If we think that this is only an American problem, we need to look twice. I look at China's debt, having or bearing in mind that this is a country really focused on manufacturing and on production. So I didn't think I could find a bleak picture here. But here we are in 2020 with China having $15 trillion of debt, or 7 times the level from 2008. Better news come from Europe, where from 2009 onwards, Germany seemed to have tried to curb the evolution of debt, and they are really on some sort of plateau, to use the pandemic terminology. But this is only valid for Germany, because in the rest of Europe and in my country, Romania, we have reached historically high levels of debt. Romania has $42.9 billion of debt, which is huge for such a small country, and the rate of change is really troubling, because we are 7.65 times the level from the financial crisis of 2008. And this is only international debt, because in this chart is not depicted the internal debt, the debt that is issued by the Romanian Finance Ministry and is really bought by the Romanian commercial banks, which are really only branches of European banks. I wanted to see how drug addicts behave, so courtesy to rehabs.com, I have looked at some traits of addictive personality. First of those are lying and manipulation. Addiction is all about lying. First, the user lies to himself, then he must lie to everyone else until stretching the truth becomes his second nature. One such financial lie is that we needed to print money, the new debt, to restart the economy amid the COVID-19 crisis. The truth is that those newly printed money are having a very hard time reaching the real economy due to bureaucracy on one hand, and because the real economy was hard hit by the pandemic and cannot generate revenue and profits right now. Who do you think a bank would choose between a restaurant on the street, which is having a hard time staying open in this crisis, and Tesla, whose stock price is skyrocketing? So the newly printed money are going straight into the stock market and fueling a bubble rally in all sorts of financial assets, from gold to real estate to stocks. The divergence between the real economy and the fake economy of the Wall Street has become visible to the naked eye. The second behavior associated with addictive personality is blame shifting, when the user will do anything or everything in his power to keep his supply of drugs, usually blaming others for the possible outcome and denying any responsibility. When they artificially inflate the money supply relative to the goods and services available, they make every dollar in circulation lose value and therefore purchasing power. They effectively steal value and purchasing power from our pockets and shifts it to the owners of the newly printed money. When the whole thing will go bust, do not expect any public figure to assume responsibility for it. And although they might accept that mistakes have been made, usually others will be to blame. Finally, a drug addict will display impulsive behavior, and that means acting without thinking of the consequences of your actions. Our authorities want us to believe that they can print their way out of any type of crisis, inflating this debt bubble into oblivion and with no negative consequences on the real economy. This looks a lot to me like a Ponzi scheme. There was a notorious Ponzi scheme in the 90s in my country, Romania, called Caritas, that really promised investors 8 times the money they invested and in 6 months from the initial payment. And this really worked for a while. This promise was so widespread that in less than a year, almost 40% of Romanian households got involved, and more than 1/3 of the money supply in Romania was flowing through this system. Of course, it didn't last for long, and by 1993 went bust. Do you think we learned anything from this? I think the only difference between the notorious Caritas scheme and the current situation is that this time it happens on a global scale. Until next time we meet, I wish you to get sober.